Hi, everyone. I'm Jill Itoro, Editor-in-Chief of SC Media and Editorial Director at Cyber Risk Alliance. I want to thank you very much for joining us for today's webcast, 5 Real-Life Scenarios Impacting Mobile Application Security, brought to us by GuardSquare. Today, we're going to hear from Ryan Lloyd, Chief Product Officer, who will explore several real-world mobile security scenarios, revealing how some commonly held assumptions about mobile security just might not hold up. Should anyone have any questions, please be sure to enter them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. And if we have time after the presentation, I'll be sure to ask those of Ryan. So Ryan, with that, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jill. Thanks everyone for joining today, wherever you're calling in from. I'm super excited to be here. I've been with GuardSquare now for the last 4 months as Chief Product Officer, and really diving deep into the world of mobile application security. In my previous roles, I've been focused more broadly on application security generally. And so this has been a really interesting learning experience as I engage with our customers and the market and prospects, and really uncover what some of the challenges are in the mobile application security world. So let's dive right in. I want to start with, I guess, some of the myths around mobile application security, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there around how mobile application security, whose responsibility it is, and how we handle it. The first myth that we see commonly held is that mobile operating systems provide adequate protections. And I think this myth stems from the concept that the native operating system implements some level of security control. But the thing to keep in mind is that Google and Apple's primary interest is much more on the end user than on the applications, right? So there's just a different level of security interest in mind than what you as an application developer or a security practitioner might care about. So, the end user concerns are more around permissions, storage, privacy settings, and making users aware of the privacy implications of the device and the apps on the device. So it's all about making the end user safe. But what happens in a scenario where the end user is the bad actor and the person that's trying to attack or manipulate your application? Suddenly, kind of the dynamics are very different, and so that's one aspect that we see as a big misconception. Another popular one is that certain platforms are more secure than others, like iOS is more secure than Android from a mobile development platform perspective. And, I think part of this stems from the fact that Apple put a lot of emphasis and brand behind security as a key characteristic and differentiating attribute. And I think, there's some truth to privacy and security and the steps that they take. As well in the early days, iOS was more of a closed source offering. So it was a little bit harder to inspect and understand. It was more opaque, and that gives it some short-term security advantages. Android, was an open source project, much more inspectable and, less mature in its early days. But I think over time, as Android has matured, they've done quite a lot to harden the mobile operating system. And now you could even say, open source to some extent provides an advantage because it's more able to be scrutinized and is more inspectable. So the key takeaway here is that both platforms exhibit key weaknesses and areas of exploitability. And from our standpoint, when we talk to customers and look at the specific threats that they're facing, there's real world examples that cover both of these platforms. Another thing that we commonly hear is that, well, my mobile app, it's really just a client. We take most of our security considerations and precautions at the server side, the back end where the data is. And there's an element of truth to the importance of the server side being maybe a more significant security risk, but it's also the surface area that has the most protection around it, whether it's firewalls like a WAF, it's the most in your control, there's more established practices, and it's more well understood in terms of how to secure that perimeter. On the client side, with the mobile device in particular, it's in an uncontrolled environment. Once your app is loaded onto somebody's device, they can do quite a lot with that device that you have no control over. And so the avenues available to you to secure that perimeter are much more limited on the client side. So plenty of publicly available tools and techniques to manipulate, tinker, and inspect your application once they're in full control of the environment that it's running on. Rooted devices, emulators, there's a lot less restrictions in place there. So that's the key takeaway in that regard. And then lastly, I think this perception has changed a lot as mobile's taken off in different industries. But, there's still customers that believe mobile app security is only for regulated industries. And I think while regulated industries maybe have more urgency and incentive to adopt practices and a security posture, the reality is mobile app security is relevant anywhere there's a large population of users and where those users have motivation or rewards that create security challenges, right? It's those motivations and those incentives that largely dictate the security risk. What's the value of the interactions and the data? And anytime a mobile application starts to gain popularity, I'd say it becomes a target in some form or another. And we'll talk about that in sort of 5 key sort of industry examples that we go through. But gaming, consumer technology, food services, retail, those are some examples of maybe less regulated industries that have real challenges that need to be contended with. So when we think about mobile app security, one of the key premises we hold is that it's not if, but it's when you breach trust or break loyalty or have a security issue that you need to contend with. So we need to all work on the premise that we're going to see security threats. Fraud is a major issue that we see. 93% of mobile transactions are fraudulent. There's some research out there that shows there's a lot of emphasis that goes behind trying to create fraud, and we'll see some examples of that as we go through here. Security testing reveals that a lot of mobile applications are still subject to vulnerabilities or don't implement the most basic of security controls. So mobile security testing is still a bit of a nascent area compared to web application security that's maybe more mature from a market perspective. We still see a lot of fake or cloned applications that are popping up all the time. And again, these are just applications that pop up to exploit users or your services in different ways, whether it's bypassing some of the monetization, redirecting ad revenue, unlocking features, bypassing coupon codes that you may have in your app, or generating bot traffic. And as we touched on in the first slide, these things can happen anywhere. iOS, Android, it doesn't really matter. We've seen examples of that on both sides of the platform equation. So what are the traditional mobile security threats that exist out there? OWASP provides a pretty good framework for thinking about this. A good foundation is the OWASP Mobile Top 10. And it's good. It's sort of a technical decomposition of the security threats. First one being improper platform usage. So where the mobile operating system's features or its constructs, permissions, authentication, or different security controls that are implemented are misused or used improperly. So that's one. Insecure data storage. So you're storing data on a device. That device can be lost. The device can be accessed sometimes by other apps that are installed on the device. So secure data storage is a key issue when there's sensitive data that needs to be stored locally on the device. Insecure communication. This is the more traditional, what you think of as a man-in-the-middle attack vector. When the communication between the device, your app, and maybe the server-side components in the back end isn't properly secured. The good news is it's a pretty well-researched area and pretty well-established practices for how to secure that communication to a point, and then we'll touch on that as we move on. Insecure authentication. This comes about in a number of different ways, but you may have certain endpoints that are not authenticated. You may think they're private APIs that you use that aren't exposed to users, but if they become discovered, those can become problematic. Or sometimes shared secrets or keys that are hard-coded in your application can weaken some of the authentication controls that you may have in your application. Cryptography is an interesting one. Insecure cryptography. Here's a case where there may be legacy or outdated cryptography that just makes it easier to break and access protected data. So there's a lot of different examples of where the cryptography techniques are constantly evolving based on compute power and academic research. And so sometimes apps can rely on third-party libraries or components that use outdated techniques. Even the Android developer kit, in some cases, will have outdated legacy crypto that your app may be reliant on, and those things need to be kept up to date. As those things are deprecated or become out of date. Insecure authorization, so kind of a counterpart to authentication. This is more around permissions control and making sure your app is correctly validating permissions and not just assuming that authentication is taking care of everything. You kind of want the concepts of access control and least privilege to kind of be reinforced even through the client application. Code quality can be a vector of security threat, buffer overflows, memory leaks, those kind of aspects. And then we have code tampering. Code tampering is where there's malicious modifications that are being made to an application. And then they can request a user to install a modified app through third-party sites, through phishing attacks. And if your code's not secure from tampering, it can be replicated and impersonated for a variety of reasons. So code tampering is a threat vector. And reverse engineering kind of goes hand in hand or related with code tampering. Reverse engineering is all about the tools used to analyze and understand an application. It can be a problem in and of itself, but it can also be a way to gather all the information needed to then implement the code tampering that we talked about. So you can use a suite of third-party tools to analyze an app, understand how it works and behaves, and use this to discover hidden features, figure out how different IP works, identify critical variables or registers that contain important data. We'll talk about some really concrete examples here, particularly in the gaming industry, where this is commonly used. And then extraneous functionality. This is where your app may be unintentionally vulnerable because of debug flags that are set, log files that persist and disclose sensitive data, or maybe just development, backdoors or diagnostic tools that have been built into your app to make it easier to debug, and we're there for administrative purposes. But if they're discoverable, anyone can access them and use them. So those are kind of the types of threats, generically speaking, that exist in the mobile app landscape, and the ones that are the most prominent and relevant based on the OWASP research that's been done. what I'd like to do now is kind of bring those to life with these real world examples that I talked about, these industry based sort of perspectives. So, in different mobile industries, how do they think about the threats that exist? And how do these typically manifest? So the first one we've got here is financial services. I'd say this is one of the early adopters of mobile security. If we go back in the history of GuardSquare, we had a tremendous amount of early success in the finance industry. And the finance industry's changed over the years. There's a stat here on the slide that talks about a third of internet users worldwide have used mobile payments in the last month. And you think about that, like, what does finance mean from a mobile perspective? Well, you've got mobile banking apps, you've got insurance apps, maybe those are the obvious ones. But then you've got payment apps, things like Venmo and such. Those are sort of direct payment apps. But then even underneath that, there's a whole layer of SDKs that exist in mobile to implement different aspects of payments, payment services. It's actually a really big business in terms of some of the big financial firms that have implemented SDKs and licensed those out to app developers around the world. So, one of many examples of industries that have really seen dramatic growth in mobile adoption in the last several years. And so what do financial services have to deal with? The thing we hear the most is compliance with regulatory standards and requirements. That's a big driver. It's not a security threat per se, but it's like they've taken all the security threats, the OWASP context, and that in itself has been repurposed into different compliance and regulatory standards that need to be satisfied. And we'll talk about one very specific example of that in the payments industry. Fraud is another key aspect. So if you've ever used your credit card, there's quite sophisticated fraud detection tools and techniques that are used by these companies. And mobile is one input and data point that can be used to help enrich that view on fraudulent activity. So monitoring for fraudulent activity and picking up those signals from mobile transactions is a really key use case. And then ensuring transactions are legitimate and protecting some of those API endpoints, particularly if you're an SDK. You want to make sure that you've got the right authorization and controls around how those SDKs are accessed and how those APIs operate. So that gives you kind of a flavor of what the financial services companies prioritize in terms of mobile security scenarios. And when we think about sort of regulatory compliance and standards, we've seen quite widespread adoption of some standards-based approaches. EMVCo is sort of a collective that's owned by American Express and Discover, MasterCard, Visa, and others. And it describes a lot of the standards and specifications for interoperability for secure payments. And they have different standards related to security testing, software protections, and so forth. And then there's related standards like PCI and others that become front and center and relevant. So I would say financial services is one of the industries that's most influenced by regulatory requirements and standards. Shifting gears away from sort of the regulated view, we contrast that with an example that is really not so regulated. And this is the area of consumer technology. And I use the term consumer technology to describe a pretty broad range of examples. So first of all, consumer technology has been a pretty major engine of economic growth in mobile. So the kinds of examples that I think everybody can relate to in consumer technology is things like IoT, where there's mobile interactions to those connected devices, fitness and healthcare, or fitness and wearables in particular is another aspect of consumer technology. Streaming. So if get your TV subscriptions on your phone or mobile device, that's another key area. And there's sort of two scenarios that we see commonly with consumer tech companies. And the first one is leaking unannounced new features in products. So, this is an area where the appetite we all have for technology is fueling this separate sort of cottage industry that's all about trying to discover and leak what's coming next and what's new. So this is a pretty rampant challenge for companies. And then some of these consumer technology companies have proprietary techniques and algorithms and IP that's really important, provides a competitive edge, and they want to protect that, whether it's compression of data to optimize for mobile use cases, ranking algorithms, whatever it is. There's real value in protecting some of that proprietary IP and not having it inspectable by competitors. But let's talk quickly about the unannounced new features, because I think that's one where there's so many examples of this out there in the industry. And if you follow the latest trends, just with iOS and Apple, there's the physical device leaks. What camera's coming in the next iPhone, but there's also software related interest. You look at the latest version of iOS 15, and people looking closely at the beta releases and whatnot to try and really figure out what capabilities are coming. So those are some high level examples, but we see this much more commonly than we ever used to. And like I said, there's a whole cottage industry that's popped up that's focused on identifying these new product features. It used to be reserved for hardware, right? You used to have these product teardowns. People would disassemble these new hardware products and figure out how they work. But now increasingly those concepts of product teardowns are really digital teardowns, right? The aim is to reveal new features that are up and coming, that are big and interesting. And I guess it's a byproduct of, everybody seeking clicks and eyeballs in media. So the challenge and impact on a consumer tech brand is that these features can be disclosed when they're not intended to be. Sometimes that gives opportunities for competitors to react, to position and diffuse sort of the interest in that feature, or create a competing alternative. Sometimes those features, they don't ever make it to the public. So they get pre-announced and leaked, and the company building it, is still kind of evaluating the viability of it. And that can result in disappointment in the brand, can also cause a lot more speculative trading in public companies. So it creates a lot of turbulence. So keeping those features secret and protecting them is a really key area, and now it extends even to the apps and the software themselves, because the tools are readily available to decompile and reverse engineer and inspect these applications. So it's where kind of the reverse engineering that we talked about in the OWASP mobile top 10 becomes real and tangible. And you just have to search through TechCrunch or Bloomberg or any sort of media publication, and you'll find plenty of examples of leaked features and unannounced features. So the next really relevant and interesting industry for us to talk about is mobile gaming. And this is an interesting one for us. It's one that we've dived deeper into in this past year through partnerships we've had with Unity and really working much more closely with mobile game developers. And the surprising thing for me when I first started looking into this was that mobile gaming's really taken off. In the last several years, it's accelerated. And I kind of see it. I have two young kids. They love to play games on their phone, Sneaky Sasquatch and things like that. So I get it, but I kind of discounted it as, casual gaming. And it turns out that mobile gaming has surpassed the rest of the video game market, the traditional PC and console game market. So mobile gaming accounts for well over half of the worldwide gaming revenue, which is mind-boggling. So what are the things that mobile game companies worry about from a security standpoint? It really all comes down to cheating and hacking those games. So the first sort of scenario are these mods that get released that enable cheating. So if you think about like big multiplayer games, Player Unknown Battleground or Fortnite, I guess, are the most prolific multiplayer games on mobile at the moment. These games rely on a competitive environment where users are competing with each other. And so when users start to modify those games and introduce hacks or cheats that give them a competitive edge, that starts to really erode the competitiveness of the game for everybody else. And the way that impacts the game developer is they start to see retention drop off. And mobile gaming is, like a lot of things, all about engagement and retention. So if you've got an unfair advantage and the game's no longer engaging and fun because it's just full of cheating, that's a major problem. But even the more casual games, you think of things like Candy Crush and Coin Master and whatnot. Those games have a different flavor of the same problem, where there may be some monetization in that game, either through in-app purchases, subscription, or advertising. And so often you'll find modified versions of games that are meant to bypass some of that monetization. And so that's even more directly tied to sort of the revenue aspects of the game. And then as you identify these sort of scenarios of cheating, particularly in the multiplayer games, we see companies looking for ways to identify specifically the user, the device where that cheating has taken place. And it's almost like a variation of the fraud monitoring that financial companies are doing, but in a gaming world, so that they can take action based on that. So you'll find there's a whole interesting scenario of identifying accounts and users who are bypassing or cheating in your game, and then banning them from competitions. You look at sort of the evolution of esports, mobile gaming competitions. That's a big component of those, more structured competitions as well. So when we think about those modifications, those game cheats that remove competitiveness and fairness, they're sophisticated, increasingly sophisticated, and there is a surprising community that exists around those modified games and that cheating. So there was a really interesting article a little while ago about a really sophisticated cheating technique that's starting to emerge, which is people modifying games and connecting them to AI systems, which are helping them, drag their cursor or aiming area on their game, their device, to use a feature called auto aim, right? Improving your accuracy of hitting your opponents in some of these multiplayer shooting games. And so that's an example of a pretty sophisticated modification, right? Using AI at the edge to kind of look at the video screen and react and take action. That's on the more sophisticated ends, but there's some pretty basic modifications that happen too, like reverse engineering an application, looking at the in-memory registers that contain incrementing values, and modifying or manipulating those so you get free coins, unlimited coins, or whatever it is the resources are in certain more casual games. And you go to these big community forums like iosgods.com or others, and you'll see like millions and millions of users interacting with and sharing these cheats and hacks that they've produced. So again, gaming, perhaps a slightly surprising industry that has some very specific scenarios around mobile security. So then we move on to healthcare, and this one's interesting for me. I spent time at a previous company working with a lot of medical device companies on the design and implementation of their medical devices. And nowadays, a lot of those medical devices have a companion mobile component to them. You think of like blood glucose monitoring for diabetes, infusion pumps, pacemakers, and even just some of the telehealth and patient records systems. They're all moving to mobile. And I think these past year and a half or 2 years has maybe even fueled more interest in telehealth and trying to handle a lot of routine health visits and problems online. So there's a couple of unique aspects that are of concern for the healthcare industry. And one that doesn't get talked about a lot, but really interests me is the brand impact of maybe some of the more academic vulnerabilities that are out there. We'll talk about what that looks like specifically, but there can be very specific brand implications around security. And in fact, we've had some pretty good success working with consulting companies that specialize in designing and developing mobile applications for medical and healthcare companies who see security as a really key advantage and differentiator in the design services that they're offering to their clients. This is another industry too, where there's oftentimes proprietary IP or algorithms that are important that need to be protected for competitive advantage, particularly when you think about the global health market. That's a real legitimate concern. And then similar to the finance vertical and industry, there is an element of compliance and regulation here. So not just payment data, but personal health information. It's something that's very sensitive and personal to all of us. So protecting that data is of critical importance. So those are some of the examples in the healthcare industry that are most relevant. But let me dig into the brand impact one a little bit, because I think this is one where not all security threats that companies face have to result in direct damages, right? Sometimes the headline is worse than the actual vulnerability itself. So a few years ago, as interest in sort of IoT started to really take off, you'd go to Black Hat and these different security research events, and there'd always be these headline stories that come out of it about hacking cars or hacking medical devices. And the interesting thing is, they're sometimes those hacks can be kind of obscure, I guess, in so much that it requires a lot of conditions to be exactly right for that vulnerability to be exploitable. And so the actual, if you really threat model these things and calculate the risk, you'd say, yeah, they're theoretically a risk, but the exploitability and relevance isn't that significant. But once it gets into a headline in the media, it doesn't really matter anymore. because the brand impact and the brand damage related to that can outweigh the actual value and exploitability of the vulnerability. So, here's two headlines that I think prove the point in terms of sensationalism, right? Hacking pacemakers to remotely attack someone, or taking an insulin pump and increasing the dosage. Again, the reason that threat might be a low probability is that, first of all, you have to have someone that wants to attack you directly. And I think when we look at the broad spectrum of mobile security attacks, they're rarely personal. Oftentimes they're motivated by aggregate economic incentives. So, but the headlines can be damaging and problematic in and of themselves. So lastly, the other sort of use case that we're seeing more and more nowadays is government and public services. So I think all governments are kind of working to create a better quality of life, increase public trust, and be more competitive in the global environment. And, I would argue, the North America, US, Canada, are probably lagging a lot of countries in this regard in terms of mobile services for government and public services. I'd say, in the Asia Pac countries, this is much more well established. Even in Europe, you'd see more pervasive use of mobile solutions for government offerings, but it's starting to catch up here as well. And there's different drivers that become relevant here. Integrity and authenticity of data is really important. Making sure that data is not manipulated or misrepresented. Privacy of sensitive data. If you're filing your taxes, you want to make sure that that's done in a way that's protecting your data, not exposing that data. And security for financial transactions, whether it's benefits payments or what have you. Securing those financial transactions kind of overlaps with a lot of the concerns in the finance industry. So, here's some examples in the U.S. at least of government and public services that have expanded over the years. So some of the government service agencies that you can look up online that have mobile applications are, the Postal Service, Homeland Security, the Institute of Health, GSA. And then there's, independent contractors that are also supporting certain government services. Mobile voting is becoming more commonplace now. And so there's different security and privacy issues that you need to contemplate as you start to build these services. Making sure that you've got a robust system for user authentication, data encryption, both storage and communication of data, and the cryptography that's used, and making sure there's good, robust security testing solutions that are in place for these. So, there's 5 sort of industries with really concrete examples of how sort of the OWASP mobile threats manifest into specific scenarios that are relevant to those industries. So how do we think about strengthening security and addressing some of those OWASP concerns and those scenarios? So for us at GuardSquare, we've been really trying to build out more and more capabilities to take a, what's known as a defense in depth approach to mobile security. We don't think that there is a silver bullet, a single technique or strategy or solution to mobile application security. We think it's a layered approach. In fact, it's layers of layers, so to speak. So, first off is the necessity of integrating application security testing into the development of your application. So every time you're doing a build, evaluating that build for security vulnerabilities and security risk, detecting those outdated crypto libraries that you're using, detecting improper usage of different platform constructs, finding where somebody's left a debug flag enabled or where there's hard-coded keys. Those are all flavors of security risk that can be identified through just continuous, ongoing testing. The next area, which is where we focused traditionally, is in the area of code hardening and runtime protection. So code hardening, starting with that, the really key aspect to code hardening is making it difficult for attackers to inspect your code and reverse engineer it. And so you'll hear a lot of this described as obfuscation. Some people kind of maybe trivialize it by referring to it as security through obscurity. And there are simple obfuscation approaches that could be characterized as that, and you shouldn't rely solely on that. But a robust code hardening solution can add a layer of security protection that's really important. And even within that code hardening, providing layers upon layers. So for example, implementing something like polymorphism, so that every time you do a build of your mobile application that implements obfuscation, doing that in a way where it's different every time. So you can't simply reverse engineer it once, and for the life of that mobile app, you've been able to successfully reverse it and understand key components of it. Constantly keeping that evolving and resetting the clock on attackers is a really key component of it. And then just the sophistication of the obfuscation techniques and how they're implemented is an important area. So code hardening can be a really critical area when we talk about protecting yourselves from reverse engineering, some of these sort of academic inspection of your applications, or the media publications that are looking for that new unannounced feature in your code base. Don't rely on code names and simple tactics, because people will pretty quickly figure those out. Sophisticated code hardening can really help insulate and protect from those kind of threats. And then runtime protection, which really maps back to the reverse engineering OWASP category. Understanding when individuals have taken the device that your app's running on and started running it on an emulator, running it in debug mode, on a rooted or jailbroken device. There's protection measures you can put in place around your application to have unpredictable or crashing behavior under those circumstances, which just makes it really difficult to reverse engineer and inspect your application. And then we have pen testing. We think pen testing continues to be a later stage step you can take to give you even just more assurance, more eyes on the security risk of your application. So it's complementary to a lot of the practices and techniques that we've described so far. And there's some great specialist firms that focus on mobile specifically, that know how to use all the reverse engineering tools and techniques, and can really help you evaluate the risk that still remains in your application that maybe you've missed in testing and through the hardening and protections that you put in place. And then lastly, we have threat monitoring. So for us, doing all this work is important, but if you're not also looking at the application and how it's being operated in the real world, you may be missing how those threats are evolving and changing over time. We think threat monitoring is a really key pillar to a mobile security strategy. It's closely related to some of the fraud monitoring use cases we talked about earlier, but it's also just a way to evaluate the efficacy of your code hardening and your runtime protections if you're able to monitor in the wild what's going on with each of your applications. So a defense in depth strategy, we think, is the way to combat these real world scenarios and support the OWASP mobile top 10 category of threats. So maybe just to quickly summarize, and then we'll move to Q&A. Mobile apps and services have reached mainstream adoption across all industries. I think if anything we've learned in the last year and a half and 2 years is just how dependent we are on these devices to do everything from ordering groceries, food delivery, transportation, financial payments, and so forth. Security risks are well known, even if you aren't familiar with them yet, and attacks on mobile applications are pervasive. Different industries have unique challenges and variations of those threats, and we believe a comprehensive mobile security strategy can help mitigate a lot of that risk. There's good answers and strategies for dealing with this. So I'll conclude there, and maybe we'll open it up for our moderator here and any Q&A that anyone might have.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Ryan. That was terrific. And yes, we have some time for questions here. So first one up. Once a security solution is implemented, are there any solutions that monitor the application?
Yeah, so that's closely related to the topic I introduced there around threat monitoring. So once you've implemented code hardening, runtime protections, threat monitoring is really the category of solution that helps you monitor and identify how many users of your device are trying to run your app on a jailbroken or rooted device, or detecting someone who's trying to hook a library or function in your application. Threat monitoring can track and monitor and maybe pass along context when those events occur. And as you aggregate that information, it can give you a pretty comprehensive view on where those threats exist in the wild in terms of demographics, parts of the world, types of devices that are most affected, versions of your app that are more susceptible to others, and can really help guide your security strategy.
Great. Okay, another one here is, when implementing a security solution for a mobile app, is that something the developers should be aware of? So I think in terms of that coordination is what we're a little curious about.
Yeah. I've been in the software development business long enough now where, I remember the days when it used to be very siloed and all these handoffs between different departments. And maybe the last part of an organization to kind of break down those silos has been the domain of security. But I think over the last several years, that started to change. So I think having the security stakeholders in your company, if you've got a dedicated information security or product security team, and having your mobile developers closely aligned and working together is critically important. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the practices I talked about, code hardening, runtime protection, monitoring of threats, security testing, that all requires the developers to be educated, aware, implement the tooling, integrated into their development process.
Great. We also have one here that someone's curious. Do you have any internal teams who are actively trying to break or bypass your own solution? So generally, I guess, some pen testing and so forth.
Yeah, we have a whole team of internal security researchers that are constantly examining threats, and they kind of serve two purposes. One, they're working at analyzing some of our customers' applications, or even sometimes prospective customers' applications, to understand where the threats exist. So when we talk about the gaming examples, we went and we looked through all these different industry communities and downloaded some of these cheats and looked at how they worked, and actively used that to guide our strategy on how to protect against those threats. But we're constantly looking internally at our own protections and evolving them based on how the landscape has evolved. Decompilers and reverse engineering tools are constantly evolving and becoming more sophisticated. So we have regular work to do to keep pace with that.
Great. And I do have to say, we've done a lot of reporting on the vulnerabilities in the gaming industry ourselves, and it always makes me cringe because I have a son that is on those gaming systems pretty frequently. All right, one last question before we have to let you go. But what are some of the benefits of using a solution like this versus a do-it-yourself type of approach?
Yeah, so we're faced with this question a lot from prospective customers. In particular, we talk to mobile engineers, and sometimes they'll look at the problem space and think that they can invent a solution. Code hardening and obfuscation is a really good example. If they've got unannounced new features in their application they're trying to protect, they might come up with a simple code name strategy to hide or protect that functionality. And often what we see is that the customers will either, one, underestimate the sophistication of the threat actors out there that are reverse engineering their application. And so the trivial approaches that might be implemented just won't cut it. Or in the case where they've accurately estimated the attackers, the cost to go and develop and build their own solution is just too overwhelming, both in terms of the upfront cost to build the capability themselves, but then also the ongoing cost to maintain and evolve that solution. We talked earlier about the fact that the threat landscape is constantly evolving. As soon as somebody discovers your technique of protecting your application, you're going to have to now go back and reinvent a new way to protect that feature. So we do the hard work for our customers by continually evolving and having this sort of built-in polymorphism in how these protection measures are implemented, which is just much more cost-effective and maintainable.
Great. Terrific. Well, Ryan, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I want to thank you so much for a great presentation. And I want to thank everybody who's listening. A reminder to folks that this will be available on demand. So please do check back, listen in if you would like again, and share it with your colleagues. But thank you for listening. And Ryan, again, thanks for all the great information.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.